There is a man in Osaka who has not felt mentally overwhelmed in 8 years. Not because his life is simple. He runs a small construction company. He has 3 employees, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a phone that never stops. His calendar is full. His responsibilities are real. His pressures are exactly the kind that drive most men into a permanent low-grade state of stress that they eventually stop noticing because they have forgotten what the alternative feels like. And yet, every evening when he comes home, he crosses the threshold of his front door and something releases. Not dramatically, not with effort. Something in his body simply lets go of the day. His jaw unclenches. His shoulders drop. The mental noise that has been running continuously since 6 in the morning goes quiet. He does not meditate. He does not journal. He has never downloaded a wellness app. He has never described himself as someone who works on his mental health. He just does 7 things. Small things. The same 7 things, roughly in the same order, every single day. And they have been doing their work quietly in the background for 8 years without him ever having to think about them. Here is what nobody tells men about mental load: the brain fog, the irritability that arrives from nowhere, the inability to switch off at the end of the day, the feeling of being physically present in a room but mentally somewhere else entirely, the exhaustion that sleep does not fix, the Sunday dread before a week that has not even started yet. These are not personality traits. They are not signs of weakness. They are the predictable neurological consequences of a nervous system that has been running in threat response mode for so long that it no longer remembers how to come out of it. And the 7 habits in this video are the exact things Japan has used for generations to interrupt that response, before it compounds, before it calcifies, before it becomes the permanent background frequency of a man's life. By the end of this video, you will have all 7. And habit 4, the one that goes against everything most men have been told about how to handle stress, is the one I want you to pay the most attention to, because it is the one most likely to produce the biggest change in the shortest time. Stay with me. Before we get into the 7 habits, one thing worth knowing about why Japan consistently produces men who carry significant responsibility without the chronic mental erosion that responsibility produces in most Western men. It is not stoicism for its own sake. It is not suppression. It is not the cultural myth of the Japanese salaryman grinding himself into the ground. That is a real phenomenon, and Japan is actively working against it. It is something older, something quieter, something built into the structure of the day long before the modern working world arrived. Japan understands the nervous system the way a mechanic understands an engine. You do not wait for the engine to break down before you service it. You build maintenance into the daily routine. You do not let pressure accumulate past a certain point before you release it. You release it consistently in small amounts before it has the chance to compound. 7 habits, all of them maintenance, none of them dramatic. Let us begin. Habit 1. Monjin, the threshold ritual. In Japan, the genkin is the small entryway space at the front of every home where shoes come off before entering the living space. This is not a hygiene rule, not primarily. It is a physical, sensory, deliberate boundary between what happened outside and what happens inside. The act of removing shoes at the threshold, placing them in the genkin, stepping up into the home, sliding into indoor slippers, is a transition ritual. It takes approximately 15 seconds, and those 15 seconds are doing something that most men have never been given a mechanism to do. They are marking the end of one context and the beginning of another. Research published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology found that physical transition rituals, specific sensory actions performed at the boundary between 2 environments, significantly reduce what psychologists call context bleed, the phenomenon where the mental state of one environment follows use involuntarily into the next. The work brain, that will not switch off at home. The stress from the commute that arrives at the dinner table, the anxiety that is still running at midnight when the trigger was a 9 in the morning email. The Genkin is a physical context interrupt. The shoes come off. The outside stays outside. The inside begins. You do not need a Genkin. You need a ritual, a specific, consistent sensory action that you perform at the same point every day, the moment you arrive home. That signals to your nervous system that the context has changed. It could be changing out of work clothes the moment you walk in, a glass of cold water before you look at your phone, 2 minutes outside in the garden before you open the front door. The specific action matters less than its consistency. Consistent rituals train the nervous system faster than any amount of willpower. Tonight, decide what your threshold ritual is. One action. The same action every single day. The work brain does not get to follow you past that point. Habit 2. Kaizen no Kokoro, the mindset of the 1%. Here's one of the primary sources of male mental load that nobody names clearly. The gap between where you are and where you think you should be. The career that has not moved as fast as you planned. The body that does not look the way it did at 28. The financial position that is not as secure as you need it to be. The version of yourself that you have been moving toward for years and that always seems to stay the same distance ahead. Most men carry this gap as a permanent low-level judgment against themselves. It does not announce itself loudly. It operates in the background, a quiet, continuous signal that things are not quite right, that you are not quite enough, that the distance between here and where you need to be is somehow a measure of your value as a man. Japan's concept of Kaizen, continuous improvement through steps so small they barely register as steps, is not a productivity system. It is a philosophy about the relationship between a man and his own progress. Kaizen says, the direction matters infinitely more than the distance. Moving forward by 1% today is not failure. It is the compound mechanism that produces every significant result over time. Dr. Robert Maurer at UCLA's School of Medicine has spent decades studying the neuroscience of small-step behavior change. His research is clear. Attempts at large change trigger the amygdala, the brain's threat center, which registers significant disruption to existing patterns as danger. The amygdala's response is resistance, avoidance, or paralysis, disguised as laziness, procrastination, or lack of motivation. It is none of those things. It is a brain doing its job of protecting existing patterns from perceived threat. A step small enough to avoid triggering that response does not get resisted. It simply happens, and then it happens again, and the gap between where you are and where you are going quietly closes, not through force, but through the daily accumulation of unremarkable forward motion. 1% today. That is the entire practice. Action. Tonight, identify one area of your life where the gap between where you are and where you want to be is generating the most background mental noise. Write down one action, not a plan, one action that moves you 1% in that direction. Do it tomorrow before you do anything else on the list. Habit 3. Shinrin-Yoku, 20 minutes that reset the male nervous system. Men are statistically less likely than women to seek formal mental health support. The reasons are complex and real and not the subject of this video, but the consequence is that millions of men carry neurological stress loads that never get professionally addressed, and that accumulate over years into the kind of chronic, low-grade mental strain that makes a man feel permanently slightly off without being able to name exactly why. Shinrin-Yoku is the Japanese practice of forest bathing, not hiking, not exercise, not goal-oriented outdoor activity, simply being in the presence of trees, walking slowly, breathing, letting the environment do its work on the nervous system. Japanese doctors write actual prescriptions for this, not metaphorically, literally a prescription for time in nature, intended to be filled with actual time among actual trees. Dr. Ching Li at the Nippon Medical School in Tokyo has spent 20 years measuring what happens to the male body, specifically during Shinrin-Yoku. Cortisol drops measurably, blood pressure lowers, natural killer cell activity, the immune system's primary defense increases significantly. In long-term studies, 2 hours of forest bathing produced immune benefits that persisted for 30 days after the walk. But beyond the immune data, there is a specific neurological mechanism relevant to mental load. Trees release airborne compounds called phytoncides, chemicals that activate the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic system is the biological opposite of fight or flight. It is the state where the body repairs, the mind clears, and the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, emotional regulation, and long-term thinking, becomes significantly more active. Most men spend the majority of their waking hours in sympathetic dominance, fight or flight running at a low level continuously. The chronic stress state that does not feel like stress anymore because it has become the baseline. 20 minutes among trees does not just feel calming. It produces a measurable shift in the autonomic nervous system away from sympathetic dominance and toward parasympathetic recovery. That shift is the biological definition of mental detox. You do not need a forest. You need trees, a park, a trail, a street with a tree line, 20 minutes, phone in your pocket, no podcast, no destination, just the trees and the slow movement and the visual world passing your peripheral vision as you walk. Once a week changes the week that contains it. Make it twice a week and the benefit compounds. Now, these first 3 habits are building the external conditions for mental clarity. But habit 4 is where this gets uncomfortable, because habit 4 is the one most men actively avoid, the one that the culture around male mental load has told you is a sign of weakness, and the one that Japan has understood as a sign of intelligence for a very long time. Habit 4. Inemuri. The deliberate rest that most men refuse to take. Rest deliberately, in the middle of the day, without apology. Inemuri is the Japanese practice of short intentional rest during the working day. On trains, in offices, in public spaces, Japanese men close their eyes and rest in the middle of the afternoon without explanation, without embarrassment, and without the cultural script that says this is what people do when they cannot handle the demands of their day. In Japanese culture, Inemuri is interpreted as evidence that you have been working hard enough to need recovery. It is a sign of commitment, not weakness. Dr. Matthew Walker at the University of California, Berkeley, whose research on sleep and cognitive performance is among the most cited in neuroscience, has documented that a 20-minute nap taken between 1 and 3 in the afternoon produces measurable improvements in reaction time, emotional regulation, decision-making quality, and creative problem-solving that are comparable in magnitude to a full additional night of sleep. Not incrementally comparable, magnitude comparable. And here is the specific male mental load connection that most people miss. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for impulse control, rational decision-making, and the ability to manage emotional responses rather than react to them, is one of the first regions to degrade under conditions of accumulated fatigue. Not catastrophically, gradually. The irritability that arrives mid-afternoon, the shortened fuse, the inability to engage fully with the people you care about in the evening because the cognitive tank is genuinely empty. 20 minutes of rest between 1 and 3 in the afternoon restores prefrontal cortex function measurably. It does not make you soft. It makes you more capable of being the man you are trying to be for the rest of the day. Set a 19-minute timer. Lie down or sit reclined. Close your eyes. You do not need to fully sleep. The neural restoration begins before full sleep onset. 19 minutes, not 25, Because sleep inertia begins at the 25-minute mark and produces the groggy disorientation that makes napping feel worse than not napping. 19 minutes. Today. Without explanation or apology. Habit 5 is the one that produces the fastest visible change, the one that people in your life will notice before you do. Habit 5. Hara Hachi Bu applied to information. Eating to 80% full-on input. Hara Hachi Bu is the Okinawan practice of eating to 80% full, stopping before the point of satiation, before your stomach sends the full signal. Most people know this as a dietary practice. Japan applies it to everything, including information. The average man in 2026 consumes approximately 11 hours of media content per day. News, social feeds, podcasts, videos, commentary, analysis. The information arrives continuously. The brain processes it continuously. The cortisol response to negative or threatening information fires continuously, and the male nervous system, which is already running in a low-level threat response state for most of the working day, is receiving continuous additional threat input from a media environment that is specifically engineered to keep it alert, reactive, and consuming. Your brain processes bad news and physical threat through the same cortisol pathway. A news headline about economic instability produces the same primary hormonal response as a near miss while driving. The magnitude differs. The mechanism is the same. Research from the American Psychological Association found that heavy news consumption is directly associated with elevated stress hormones, increased anxiety, and significantly reduced sense of personal control. Across all demographics, but with measurably stronger effects, in men who score high on responsibility orientation. Men who feel responsible for providing, protecting, and problem solving. Most men in your demographic. Hara Hachi Bu applied to information means consuming to 80% of your capacity, not zero news, not information avoidance. A deliberate, decided limit on input, set before the feed begins, not after it has already run for 2 hours. One specific window for news and social media, maximum 30 minutes. Chosen by you, not by the algorithm. Outside that window, the feed is closed. Not because the information is unimportant, because your nervous system has a finite capacity for incoming threat signals before it tips from productive alertness into chronic stress. Japan does not consume mindlessly. It does not eat past full, and it does not read past the point where the input is making the mind worse rather than better. The practice is the same, only the substance changes. Tonight, decide your information window. Write it down. Tomorrow, when the window closes, close the tab. Now I want you to stay with me for the next 2 habits because this is where the practice moves from managing the problem to permanently changing the baseline. Habit 6. Mushin, the empty mind practice that takes 4 minutes. Mushin is a concept from Japanese martial arts. Translated literally, it means no mind. The mental state in which thought is not absent, but no longer sticky. Ideas arise and pass without the mind grabbing onto them, analyzing them, worrying them, replaying them in loops. Western culture tends to describe this as meditation and then makes it sound either mystical or impossibly difficult. It is neither. Here is the simple version used in Japanese practice. Sit in a chair, both feet on the floor, set a timer for 4 minutes. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Your only instruction is this. When a thought arrives, notice it and let it pass without following it. Not suppressing it, not engaging with it, not arguing with it or analyzing it or trying to solve the problem it is presenting. Just noticing it and allowing it to continue past like a car moving through an intersection. You will not succeed at this perfectly. That is not the standard. The standard is attempting it for 4 minutes. Research from Harvard Medical School found that regular brief mindfulness practice, as short as 4 minutes per day, produced measurable changes in gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex after just 8 weeks, specifically in the regions associated with emotional regulation, focused attention, and stress response modulation. The brain you have been using to manage your mental load is not fixed. It is plastic. It changes in response to how it is used. 4 minutes of Mushin practice every day for 8 weeks produces a brain that is measurably better at not being captured by its own noise. 4 minutes. After the coffee, before the phone, or after lunch, or before bed. The time of day is less important than the daily consistency. Set a timer tonight. 4 minutes. Try it once before you decide whether it works. And now, the final habit. The one the man in Osaka does every single evening. The one that ties all 6 together and makes them sustainable rather than aspirational. Habit 7. Seijaku and Yoru no Kanshaku. Evening stillness and the nightly release. Seijaku means stillness, silence, tranquility. And in Japan, Seijaku is not a morning practice alone. It is built into the evening with the same deliberateness that Japan builds everything it considers important. Every evening before sleep, there is a small ritual of mental closure, a deliberate releasing of the day. Not journaling in the therapeutic sense, though journaling works for many men who try it. A simpler practice, 3 questions, written or simply held in the mind, 3 minutes maximum. What did I do today that moved something forward? What happened today that I have no control over and can therefore release? What is the one thing I want to do differently tomorrow? That is it. 3 questions, 3 minutes. Then the day is closed. Research from Dr. James Pentbaker at the University of Texas, whose work on expressive writing and psychological health spans over 30 years, has consistently found that the act of briefly narrating the events of the day to yourself, particularly the negative or stressful events, significantly reduces the nighttime intrusive thinking that keeps men awake and reduces sleep quality. The thoughts that circle at midnight are not circling because they are unsolvable. They are circling because they were never formally acknowledged. The brain keeps returning to unprocessed events the way a search engine keeps returning results for a query that was never resolved. 3 questions resolve the query. The brain gets the acknowledgement it was seeking. The loop closes. And sleep, when it arrives, is deeper because the mind is not running maintenance in the background on the open files of the day. Seijaku, after the 3 questions, means protecting that closed state. The phone goes down, the news goes off, the content stops. Not as self-denial, but as the recognition that what you put into your brain in the 30 minutes before sleep is what your brain processes during the night. The man in Osaka does not have a perfect life. He does not have an easy one. He has a life with the same volume of pressure and demand and uncertainty that most men are carrying. He just has 7 things he does consistently that mean the pressure never gets to compound past the point he can carry it. The Genkin that tells his nervous system the day is over. The Kaizen mindset that closes the gap between where he is and where he is going by 1% every day. The 20 minutes among trees that shifts his autonomic nervous system from threat to recovery. The 19-minute rest that restores his prefrontal cortex before the afternoon asks more of it. The information limit that stops his nervous system from being continuously fed threat signals it was not designed to process continuously. The 4 minutes of Mushin that slowly rewires the brain, doing the carrying. And the 3 questions at night that close every open loop before sleep arrives. 7 habits. None of them complicated. None of them requiring a version of yourself that does not exist yet. They require a different structure. A daily architecture that treats your mental state as something worth maintaining. Not dramatically, not publicly, not with effort that announces itself, but quietly, consistently, in the small moments that most men spend on their phones. Before you go, 1 question. Of these 7 habits, which one hit you in a way you were not expecting? Not the most interesting one. The one that produced something quieter than interest. The specific recognition of something you already knew you needed without having a name for it. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this shifted something in how you think about your own mental load, share it with one man in your life who is carrying more than he is letting on, who looks fine from the outside, who says he is good when someone asks. He may be 7 habits away from actually being good. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.